April 18th, 2008, Mercer County, Kentucky. Rain had been falling for 3 straight days when 17-year-old Ellie Harper walked into the Red Valley Bank carrying a cardboard box filled with maps, handwritten soil reports, and old photographs of the Harper farm. Mud covered her boots. Her jacket smelled like wet dirt and diesel fuel. Upstairs, Greystone Holdings was finalizing a multi-million-dollar land deal with the bank. They planned to build warehouses and shipping yards across the valley. The newspapers called it the future of Mercer County. Ellie came to tell them the ground beneath that future was about to collapse. Nobody expected her to speak, and nobody expected her to be right. The room went silent as she spread her papers across the conference table. Hand-drawn diagrams, water measurements, sinkhole locations, notes copied from old county records. Then the laughter started. Leonard Voss, the lead engineer from Chicago, leaned back in his chair with a grin. "You made these yourself." Ellie nodded. "I used my father's measurements too." That made them laugh even harder. The vice president of the bank adjusted his tie and sighed. "Miss Harper, Greystone hired one of the best engineering firms in Illinois. They used satellite imaging, seismic surveys, and modern radar systems." He tapped her papers with 2 fingers. "You're showing us handwritten notes." Ellie looked toward the rain running down the windows. "Your machines missed the hollow sections beneath the south ridge," she said quietly. Leonard smirked. "There are no hollow sections." "There are now." The certainty in her voice irritated him more than the accusation itself. He walked over and flipped through her papers. "So this is the scientific report?" he asked loudly. "Mud theories from a farm girl." Several men laughed again, but Ellie never reacted. That was the strange part people remembered later. She never argued, never raised her voice, never begged them to believe her. She simply stood there while a room full of wealthy men treated her like she was too young and too rural to understand anything important. Then Leonard pointed to one of her maps. "You discovered all this using what exactly?" Ellie hesitated for only a second. "My father's drill rig." The room exploded again. "The rusty machine behind your barn." Leonard laughed. "It still works." Ellie replied. "Number," he said. "It still exists." "That's different." More laughter. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Ellie slowly gathered her papers back into the box. One page slipped onto the floor near Leonard's shoes. He picked it up and read the sentence written at the bottom. Estimated collapse window, less than 12 months. "You really believe this?" he asked. Ellie took the page back carefully. "When the ground starts moving," she said softly. "It won't stop." Then she walked out into the rain, and most people in Mercer County thought that was the end of it. But this story was never really about a teenage girl interrupting a bank meeting. It was about the man who taught her how to listen to the land, long before the land began warning anyone else. Daniel Harper rarely spoke more than necessary. People around town used to joke that you could spend an entire afternoon beside him and hear fewer than 20 words. But Daniel understood land better than most engineers understood machines. The Harper family had owned those 142 acres since the years after World War II, rocky Kentucky farmland beside unstable limestone ridges and narrow creek beds most farmers avoided. Daniel loved it anyway. When Ellie was a little girl, she used to follow him through muddy fields at sunrise while he checked fence lines and drainage ditches. Sometimes he would kneel beside the dirt without saying a word, resting his hand against the ground like he was listening to something underneath it. One day Ellie finally asked what he was doing. Daniel looked toward the hills and said quietly, "Land talks before it breaks." Years later, she realized he meant that literally. Daniel could hear things other people ignored. Underground water shifting after storms, hollow vibrations beneath tractor tires, changes in the soil after heavy rain. And more than anything else, he trusted the old drill rig sitting inside the Harper barn. The machine had been built in 1963 by Ellie's grandfather, Walter Harper, who once worked with geological survey crews near abandoned mining tunnels across western Kentucky. The rig looked ancient, rust along the steel frame, faded paint, hand-welded parts no factory would ever approve. But Walter had secretly modified the machine for decades. Stronger torque gears, reinforced drill rods, custom vibration stabilizers made from salvaged mining equipment. To most people, it looked like junk. To Daniel Harper, It was more trustworthy than modern machines that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And slowly, Ellie became just like her father. By 14, she could operate the drill rig alone. By 15, she was recording groundwater changes beside him every Sunday night. Then came the flood of March 2006. 3 rivers overflowed. Roads disappeared underwater. Farms across Mercer County nearly drowned in mud and debris. Daniel worked day and night helping neighbors move cattle and repair flood damage. Then one cold morning after the storm finally passed, Ellie found him collapsed beside the barn. The drill rig was still running behind him. After the funeral, the machine stayed exactly where he left it, covered in mud, silent, one glove hanging from the side rail. Most people expected the Harper family to lose the farm soon after. Bank debt was already crushing them. Then Greystone Holdings arrived, and suddenly the Harper land became valuable. But a few months after Daniel's death, Ellie discovered something hidden inside the old drill rig, something her father had protected for years. And what she found there would eventually destroy the reputation of one of the most respected engineering firms in the Midwest. A week after the meeting at Red Valley Bank, Ellie finally opened the hidden steel compartment welded beneath the drill rig's control panel. She almost missed it. The latch had been painted over years earlier, buried beneath layers of grease and rust. Daniel Harper had never mentioned it. Not once. Inside was a weathered leather folder wrapped in oilcloth. And the moment Ellie unfolded the papers inside, she understood why her father had fought so hard to keep Greystone away from the South Ridge. The documents were old mining surveys from 1961, hand-marked tunnel maps, underground water routes, structural notes written by her grandfather, Walter Harper. Beneath the proposed Greystone construction site sat a network of abandoned coal tunnels stretching nearly half a mile beneath the valley. Most had been sealed decades earlier after partial collapses, but several sections remained hollow. And directly beneath the South Ridge was a massive, unsupported chamber hidden under layers of limestone and wet clay. Ellie stared at the map for nearly an hour in silence, while rain tapped softly against the barn roof. Then she noticed something else. Small handwritten notes beside the tunnel sketches. Modern radar skips limestone reflection. Vibration changes before fracture spread. Ground sounds solid until water pressure shifts. The notes belonged to Walter Harper. Suddenly the old drill rig made sense. It had never been just a farm machine. Walter had rebuilt it to detect underground instability through vibration changes modern systems often ignored. Daniel spent decades improving it even further. That was why he trusted the rig more than expensive survey equipment from the city. And that was the part nobody in Mercer County knew. The Harper family had been studying that land for almost 50 years. Meanwhile, Greystone Holdings had studied it for less than 6 months. But the deeper Ellie looked into the maps, the worse the truth became. The tunnels weren't simply unstable. They were slowly filling with redirected groundwater after the flood of 2006. Pressure was building beneath the ridge every season. And if Greystone added enough weight above it, the entire section could collapse straight into the river valley. What happened next was the moment Ellie stopped trying to convince people. After that, she simply started preparing for the day they would finally understand. Construction began in late summer. First came the survey crews, then bulldozers, then fleets of gravel trucks rolling through Mercer County from sunrise until dark. The town loved it at first. Restaurants filled with contractors every evening. Local politicians gave interviews beside heavy equipment. Greystone hung banners across Main Street promising jobs, growth, and a new era for Western Kentucky. Only Ellie kept watching the ground. Every night after work at the feed store, she drove the old Harper truck out to the South Ridge with a flashlight and her father's notebooks. And slowly, the land began doing exactly what Daniel Harper once warned about. Fence posts tilted, drainage ditches widened, hairline cracks appeared near the lower pasture. Water inside nearby wells turned cloudy after storms. Most people ignored it, but not Ellie. She measured every change carefully. And there was something else. At night, the drill rig started producing a deeper vibration beneath the ridge, a strange, hollow resonance Daniel once described as the sound of ground losing its spine. Ellie hadn't heard that sound since the flood before her father died. One evening, while Greystone workers poured concrete near the riverbank, Ellie noticed several cattle refusing to cross the southern pasture entirely. The animals gathered near the fencing and stood perfectly still, staring toward the construction site. That frightened her more than the cracks. Animals noticed instability long before humans did. But when she tried warning the county inspector, he barely listened. Greystone's engineers had already signed off on everything. Leonard Voss even appeared on local television, smiling confidently beside the site. "The project is perfectly stable," he told reporters. "Some people are simply afraid of progress." Everybody knew who he meant. And soon, Mercer County started treating Ellie Harper like a stubborn girl trying to sabotage the town's future. People whispered when she entered stores. Some blamed her for delaying construction permits earlier that year. Others laughed openly about the collapse girl. But Ellie never stopped checking the ridge, because buried beneath the noise and attention, she kept finding signs nobody could explain away. The ground was moving faster now, and then came the storm in September. 3 days of hard rain soaked the valley again. The river rose higher every hour. Water rushed through drainage channels beside the construction site, like dark brown rivers. Ellie barely slept. Near midnight on September 13th, she drove out to the ridge alone, carrying her father's flashlight and an old thermos of coffee. Rain hammered against the truck windshield, while lightning flashed across the hills. The construction site stood empty in the darkness, except for parked excavators and unfinished concrete foundations glistening under floodlights. Ellie started the drill rig beside the fence line. The old engine growled to life slowly, coughing smoke into the rain. Then the vibration hit. Deep, violent, wrong. She grabbed the steel handle beside the drill assembly and felt the trembling move through the machine into her hands. The hollow chamber beneath the ridge had widened, far wider than before, and suddenly she understood something terrifying. The collapse wasn't months away anymore. It was close, very close. She shut the machine off immediately and stared toward the floodlit construction yard beyond the rain. Tomorrow morning, Greystone Holdings planned to host a public ceremony announcing the final expansion phase of the project. Bank officials, reporters, investors, and county politicians would all be standing directly beside the South Ridge, directly above the hollow section. Ellie sat inside the truck for nearly 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, while rain pounded against the roof. Then she looked at her father's notebook resting on the passenger seat. One sentence had been underlined heavily years earlier. "The ground always warns you before it takes something back." By sunrise, Mercer County was about to learn exactly what Daniel Harper meant. September 14th, 2009. The rain finally stopped just before sunrise, leaving Mercer County wrapped in cold gray fog. Water dripped from fence wires. Mud covered the shoulders of every road leading toward the Greystone construction site. By 8 o'clock, the valley was crowded with people. County officials stood beneath white event tents near the South Ridge. Reporters carried cameras through the wet grass. Bank executives shook hands beside giant banners showing future warehouse renderings that would supposedly transform the entire region. And near the center of it all stood Leonard Voss in a dark overcoat, smiling like a man who had already won. A massive concrete platform had been poured beside the ridge only days earlier. Behind it sat 2 excavators and a line of loaded gravel trucks waiting for the ceremony to end. Nobody noticed Ellie Harper's truck until she parked near the fencing. People turned slowly as she stepped out. The same muddy boots, the same brown jacket, the same quiet expression. Somebody near the crowd muttered, "Not her again." Leonard saw her immediately. For a second, irritation crossed his face like he was tired of seeing the same problem refuse to disappear. Then he laughed softly and walked toward her through the wet grass. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" Ellie ignored the question. "You need to move everyone away from the ridge," she said. Leonard sighed heavily. "There are reporters here today. Miss Harper, important people. Don't embarrass yourself again. The ground opened more last night." "There is no opening." Ellie looked toward the concrete platform. "It's already moving." Leonard smiled for the cameras gathering nearby. This is exactly what fear looks like when people can't accept progress. A few people around him nodded, but something felt wrong in the valley that morning. Even the air seemed heavy. Birds that normally gathered near the creek were gone. The cattle in nearby fields stood clustered against distant fencing, restless and silent. Water trickled through cracks in the muddy slope beneath the platform. Ellie noticed all of it, and then she heard the sound. very faint at first, a deep vibration beneath the ground. Not thunder, something lower, something buried. Her face changed instantly. She stepped backward and looked toward the ridgeline. Then she shouted, "Get away from the platform!" The crowd froze. Leonard turned toward her angrily, but before he could answer, the earth beneath them released a sound like a tree splitting in half underground. Crack! The concrete platform shifted sideways. People screamed. One of the excavators tilted violently as the ground beneath its tracks suddenly dropped several feet. Wet soil began sliding toward the riverbank in slow motion at first, then faster and faster. Another crack exploded beneath the ridge. The entire hillside gave way. Concrete shattered. Steel barriers folded inward. Loaded gravel trucks slid sideways into collapsing mud like toys falling into water. The sound was enormous. Not an explosion, something worse. The sound of the earth tearing itself apart. Panic spread instantly across the ceremony grounds. Reporters dropped cameras. Officials ran through mud trying not to fall. One bank executive lost his footing and nearly disappeared into a widening fracture before workers pulled him back. And right in the middle of the chaos stood Leonard Voss, frozen. The ground beneath him suddenly collapsed 3 feet downward. He hit the mud hard as the ridge behind him broke apart and slid toward the river in a wave of dirt, rock, and shattered concrete. People later said the entire valley seemed to move. But what nobody forgot was Ellie Harper. While everyone else panicked, she was already moving toward the workers closest to the collapse zone. She grabbed one laborer by the jacket and dragged him away seconds before a section of ground disappeared behind him. Another truck driver later swore Ellie pointed directly at the exact places about to fail moments before they collapsed. Like she already knew, because in truth, she did. The Harper maps had marked nearly every weak section beneath that ridge years earlier. Within minutes, sirens filled the valley. News helicopters circled overhead, while rescue crews blocked off the entire site. Tons of machinery disappeared into the collapsed earth below the ridge. The damage reached nearly 200 feet across by the time the ground finally stopped moving. And standing there in the middle of rain, mud, and silence, Mercer County realized something impossible. The teenage girl they laughed at had been the only person telling the truth. For nearly a week afterward, nobody talked about anything else. Every television station in Kentucky replayed footage of the collapse. Reporters interviewed engineers, county officials, and terrified workers who escaped seconds before the ridge gave way. But the most requested interview was always the same. Ellie Harper. She refused almost all of them. Meanwhile, investigators began examining the site, and the deeper they looked, the uglier the story became. Greystone Holdings had ignored multiple warning signs, so had the bank. Internal emails revealed several subcontractors reported unusual ground instability months earlier. Drainage shifts had already been documented after heavy rains, but executives pushed construction forward anyway to avoid delays and financial losses. Then investigators discovered the abandoned mining tunnels beneath the ridge, the exact tunnels Ellie warned them about. Leonard Voss tried defending his reports at first. He claimed no modern scan revealed significant structural danger. But once experts examined the Harper drill rig and Walter Harper's old geological notes, the story changed completely. The old machine had detected vibration irregularities modern radar partially missed because of the limestone density beneath the valley. Suddenly, the junk machine from the Harper barn became national news. Photographs of the rusted drill rig appeared across newspapers beside headlines about engineering failure and corporate negligence. And the humiliation Leonard once forced onto Ellie slowly turned back toward him. His firm lost contracts within months. Greystone Holdings nearly collapsed under lawsuits and financial losses. Red Valley Bank quietly settled multiple legal claims out of court after evidence showed they dismissed Ellie's report without proper review. But strangely enough, Ellie Harper never celebrated any of it. That was the part people respected most afterward. She never mocked Leonard, never insulted the bank, never stood before cameras pretending she was smarter than everyone else. She simply returned home to the Harper farm, repaired fences, worked the land, and restored her father's drill rig, piece by piece inside the old barn. Years later, people around Mercer County still talked about the morning the ridge collapsed. But eventually the story became less about engineering failure and more about something else entirely. About how easily people confuse money with wisdom, how quickly they laugh at things they don't understand, and how often quiet people see danger long before loud people do. Because Daniel Harper had been right all along. Land always talks before it breaks. The problem is, most people are too arrogant to listen until the ground finally answers for itself.